we doing, Kellen?
I'm doing all right. Thank you for taking on this album review.
Yeah,
Alan and I had talked about doing a joint venture, so here we are talking about the new
hmm
self-titled Gates of Slumber record. How many years since their last, like 13, I want to say?
13 years since the last full-length album and 10 years since they broke up after the Stormcrow EP came out in 2013 and the band called it quits in 2014 following for folks who aren't familiar with this band, they've had a, rough go of it with three former members having passed away since the band formed in the late 90s. So, yeah, it's very cool to see them come back. I don't think a lot of people expected them to after such a bad run of misfortune. But Carl has, recruited some folks. It's one of the older drummers who has come back into
Right.
the fold, and then he's got another new member to round it out. And here we are with Gates of Slumber coming back out of the abyss in 2024.
When
What did you think when you saw that they were coming back, Kellen?
yeah, so Alan and I we've talked about how this has been such a tremendous year for Doom as a genre.
hmm
And Gates of Slumber, one, when I saw it come through on the promo list, it caught me off guard because I had no idea
Same.
this was coming, right?
Yep.
It's been a band that's been dormant for so long
hmm
and sort of splintered. They have now the drummer who has returned was in Apostle of Solitude, which
Yep.
is another Doom band from Indiana. Um, and obviously, Carl had splintered off and had the Wretch that was sort of his side project.
hmm
So the idea of a Gates of Slumber record returning all these years later, one, I was super excited for it. And it's a band that I kind of feel as an American Doom band, probably one of the most important projects to come together in the 21st century.
Yeah,
Um,
they've been a very good one, kind of quietly so at the same time. Yeah, they never did quite get as much of a spotlight or recognition as they should have the first time around. If for no other reason than that, I'm glad that they're back to maybe, get a little more credit since, they didn't, it's not like they were put down or anything, but I feel like they definitely went overlooked in the early 2000s when they were first on the scene.
so let's talk a little bit about that
Sure.
because I think their arrival sort of the history in which the context, right, that they arrive in
Mhm.
is a little bit unique, right? So at very end of the 90s, they form, I believe around 98.
I think that's right. Yep.
Um, and they finally get together, they release a EP, but just talk about, for me, when we talk about the sound of Gates of Slumber and why I'm excited for their return, is Doom and around that time period, at the turn of the millennia, you have I think really two well, I would say popular camps, right? You have like the stoner, we're going to talk about weed stuff.
Yep.
And then you have this almost like very modernist sort of experimental drone scene, right? For
Yep.
me, it's like you have the um, Bongzillas of the world that got a lot of press and attention, right?
Yep.
And you also have bands like ISIS, as an example.
Yeah, the
When you talk
Sun bands and
when you
stuff.
talk
Yeah.
about like bands that were popular and I think well known for that time period, it's on the opposing sides of that spectrum.
Yeah, it's
And
kind of like
when I
once
think,
once Reverend Bizarre, kind of called it quits, relatively early in their, career. You're right. Things just kind of went in. Yeah, it's like okay, we're done with that. I guess we'll try these other pathways.
right, I guess what I'm getting at is like the American doom scene,
Mm,
right?
fair.
Um, right, you could say they're internationally, you had Reverend Bizarre, you had Doom Sword, right? But
hmm
they were carving out their own sort of space and doing something unique. But as an American doom band, I feel Gates of Slumber was kind of taking their sound for me was very American. They were traditional in the sense they reminded me of Saint Vitus.
Yes.
But those early records also, you have this fascination with almost like they pulled the whole Manowar high fantasy thing and put it
hmm
front and center.
Oh yeah,
Is like
it's right here
We're
on the
not going to
cover of
be
their
as,
second album.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, they're going for all that kind of Ken Kelly artwork and pulling all the Robert Howard and all the Lovecraft themes they can into it. So yeah, they kind of take a lot of the stuff that's popular like in epic metal and use that as the raw material for their doom metal.
And
And I think it's
no one,
fantastic.
and in 2000, I mean, Suffer No Guilt is 2006. Like,
Mhm.
no one, I mean, one, Doom doesn't get a lot of attention, period, but
Yep.
no one was doing that. Like, that was not cool or popular or
Mhm.
publicized at the time.
No, that's a good point because now everybody and their mother does that.
Right.
The Lovecraftian themes are just, everywhere. But you're right there, early mid 2000s, that wasn't so much a thing. You had a band here and a band there, pulling inspiration from those kind of references and sources, but not very many, and not a lot in this kind of doom. You found it sometimes like more in funeral doom, maybe, for the Lovecraftian stuff. And yeah, anybody that wanted to do the Conan sword and sorcery stuff usually strayed more into epic slash power metal kind of veins.
Yeah, you had like the Solstice and Scald and Doom Swords doing very Bathory sort of
Hmm.
Viking
Yep.
kind of heavy metal or doom metal, and then you had this, and that's kind of the closest thing. The Finnish scene may be an approximation, but in the American scene, those bands to me um, are a bit different because I hear this sort of affection for Saint Vitus Die Healing when I
Oh yeah.
listen to like there's something very blue collar about their sound, and I don't know if it's
Hmm.
the Indiana part of them.
Yep. Coming out of the Midwest could be.
Yeah, they seem to be very much connected to a kind of American doom sound that was a departure from what was going on in Europe, and uh, I think is one of the more enduring qualities is they seem to sort of champion a kind of doom metal that was a little bit of a progression by comparison to just kind of doing like a more augmented approach to the blues, right? There's
Hmm.
something very much sort of Conan the Barbarian about their whole world,
Very
at
much
least
so. Yeah.
early on. So here we get the record, some 13 years later since the Wretch, um, and from the continuation of their sound, like what did you think when you first sort of heard the record?
When I first heard it, one thing that stood out to me a lot was that it feels like they picked up pretty much where they left off with the Wretch. The Wretch was a little bit of a change of direction for Gates of Slumber. They were starting to drop some of that kind of high fantasy overtures that we've been talking about. The music didn't change a ton. It was still, yes, right in that kind of, Saint Vitus camp of doom metal, but they weren't doing as much of the Howards and the Lovecrafts and that kind of stuff. That felt more of the songs had a little bit more of like, the traditional doom tropes of, just, war, but in a very general sense. War is bad, not in the, soldier with, broadsword on a battlefield kind of, war. More songs that were just, yeah, the kind of general downer type vibe. Which is something that threw me off about The Wretch a little bit. It's an album that isn't bad, but I don't return to it very often because I feel like, they started to drift away from what made them special and maybe move a little bit towards more just, the traditional sound. And especially for, yeah, lyrical inspiration. And that's kind of what I got the first pass through with this new self-titled album too. I'm like, okay, they're still playing very solid American St. Vitus inspired doom, but it feels like they're still pretty content to just stick to these very sort of, Doom 101 concepts for the songs. So that was my takeaway on first listen. What was yours?
Well, I have to say, before I even heard the record, I was kind of nervous with the album artwork or lack
Oh, it's
thereof.
terrible. It's terrible.
I mean, I know that there's like, speaking of a Saint Vitus sort of look, the black background with just the band sort of name. Yeah. Like
Yep.
I get it. Um, but I was a little bit nervous because I was used to that Ken Kelly artwork.
Yeah, we're used to
Um,
covers like
yeah, yeah,
this, and we're
yeah.
used to covers like this for Gates of Slumber, and covers like this. Yeah. But even the Wretch had kind of drifted away from that a little bit. The Wretch had a
Right.
little bit more of a generic art direction, but this one has no art direction.
Yeah.
It's just the logo and it's just the outline of the logo and that particular style. It's kind of hard to even read the band's name the way it appears on the cover because it's
Yeah.
that spiky kind of font that, and it kind of just, if you don't know it says Gates of Slumber, you're going to stand there in the record store for a while trying to decipher this one.
Yeah.
It's not a good cover.
It was a little bit, disappointing for such like a
Hmm.
comeback record.
Yep.
Um, the the album opens, and so the first track here, I should probably reference, did you get the impression listening to it that this was a pandemic record?
Actually, I didn't. It could have been, but it didn't strike me that way right off the top. Just because it struck me as being a lot like the Wretch, which was way almost a decade pre-pandemic. So I was kind of stuck on that impression. But apparently, it struck you that way.
Yeah, I mean, the opening track that I just want to get to, so Embrace the Lie.
Hmm.
And that leads into We Are Perdition. Those two songs, when he starts talking about global Holocaust and We Are Embrace the Lie, lyrically, those songs spoke to me as pandemic themes within a
Mm.
doom sort of.
Yep.
um, Embrace the Lie has this sort of like repetitive call and response during the course of the chorus there, right?
Yep.
It has, this line and then lie that the band sort of jumps in. And that, to your point about a break from sort of fantasy, it felt to me like a bit more of a traditional sort of like
Hmm.
doom, right? There's no sort of soldier of fortune or anything like that to talk about. It's
Yeah.
just, it's like sadness and paranoia and isolation.
Yeah. Exactly. It's that doom trope of like, they're all out to get you. You're doomed.
Surprising what's behind and live mindless visions in your mind.
Right. And then by the time we get to We Are Perdition, which marginally picks up the pace a little bit out there.
Hmm.
That one, I mean, it just all about sort of plague
Yep.
and a decimation of population. Like, and it just, to me, I thought these are definitely pandemic songs. Like these are
Hmm.
during that time period, they must have been writing and thinking like these are great songs for a Doom record. So
Yep, they
immediately
could
that
be,
was
and
my first
they
impression.
definitely they work in the context of the pandemic and COVID for sure. Yeah, at the same time, they also would have fit on a Saint Vitus album from 1985 or 1986 in that context, and you can interpret them whichever way you want to at that point. So yeah, they definitely could be pandemic songs, but if so, they're definitely written in a way that they're going to fit in with kind of the again kind of that mainstream doom approach in terms of what are your kind of key themes? Yeah, doom, despair, plague, death. It's all the bad, sad stuff.
Were there the initial songs that stood out to you?
Musically or lyrically?
Either one, ones that you
Um,
grabbed onto.
First impressions for those two songs. For Embrace the Lie, like it's not the strongest song on the album. It moves very slowly. It's not bad, but I feel like it probably for the opener, I would have picked something maybe with just a little more punch or maybe just a little tighter. I probably would have put that one somewhere later in the track list. So for me, it's not the strongest opening track. And again, that kind of echoes the Wretch, because I don't think the opening track on that album is one of the better ones on the album. We Are Perdition, though, like you said, it picks up the pace a bit there. That one, yeah, feels a lot more melodic. That track to me feels like Gates really channeling their inner Sabbath. It's got a much stronger bluesy presence to it. The chorus is more memorable and more singable. Like you said, it's not just the here, lie, kind of back and forth. This one's, got, it has, a really good structure to it where you can really start nodding your head along with it and want to turn it up a bit. So yeah, the opener, Yeah, didn't quite connect, but I do like We Are Perdition. I think it's one of the better songs.
You ignore. We are perdition. We are the lost. A new extinction.
So, okay, so that's the album start. What do you think of how the album kind of moves into the midsection, Kellen?
So once we get to Full Moon Fever, this, I mean, feels like an interesting sort of departure because it's not full on like uh gloom of that kind of the world that we're talking about here.
Yep.
Um, it's like a horror theme, right? It's like talking about a werewolf transformation.
Yep, it's a werewolf song.
And there's like a cool little effect where this, your werewolf's in the middle of a transformation, screaming and
Yeah.
all
Yeah. And they have
that.
like the sound effect where it's kind of like the body kind of you hear
Right.
like all the sinews popping and stuff kind of sound effect. Yeah, that works pretty good in the middle of that. I agree.
Yeah. So that, I mean, that song's a good amount of fun.
Hmm.
Um, I don't know, it doesn't really speak to, I guess, different parts of this band's identity that I think are well codified, but
Hmm.
uh, I do think that moment on the record is a standout. And when I heard that break where they kind of give this horror theme, um, I think it works pretty well.
Yeah. But yeah, you're right. It is something they haven't really dabbled with before. So that alone makes it stand out a bit.
Yeah, it's
I'm hoping they don't get in the pattern that next album we get the Mummy song, and the album after that we get the Creature from the Black Lagoon song. Let's not do that. Let's not turn it into that kind of theme.
the probably the observation I'd make here is that I feel at some point the Wretch was an example of how Carl's songwriting became more introspective. And I think Doom
Mm.
does that in a lot of ways,
Hmm.
where on this sort of iconic era in my mind from Suffer No Guilt to Hymns of Blood and Thunder, it was very much sort of playing in this fantasy protagonist world, right? It played
Oh
out
yeah.
like way you would write an epic heavy metal record in terms of the lyrical content.
Oh, very much so.
So anytime, whether it can be a werewolf or whatever it is, when it moves back to them sort of playing with a different kind of protagonist that isn't Carl's internal, struggles, I think that's where you see Gates of Slumber. And then parts of this record where it is more introspective, it's like the side of the wretch that they haven't let go, that's
Hmm.
still in operation there. So
Yeah, that could be. And part of it too, we're kind of, at least I'm lamenting, the departure, from all the fantasy stuff. But at the same time, they did this for several albums in a row. And they dug pretty deep in it. One thing I always liked was, Carl always had, liner notes for every track that would tell you like which, particular Lovecraft story this came from, or, which particular, Moorcock, scene this song was inspired by. But after doing it for several albums, they may have sort of outgrown that in a way, or just felt like they had played that out. You can only go back to that well maybe many times before it would start to feel too repetitive. So yeah, maybe moving into things like songs about werewolves and feeling bad is just a growth and maturation for the band that they feel like yeah, what there's not really another you know short story that I want to write a song about at this point. I've done a lot of that. So, and if so, that's fair enough.
I do think the following track, At Dawn, is probably the closest example for me when they get back to a little bit of the heavy metal side. Would you
Yes,
say
and
that's
it's a
fair?
killer.
At Dawn for me is if I'm gonna pick one song off this album that makes me feel like a glimpse of that epic heavy metal side that's still sort of burning bright for this band,
Mhm.
that's gonna be the one I point you towards.
Agreed. Yeah. Even though with that one, one thing though that again, where I don't think it goes completely back to it, it's giving hints of the a little bit more that ride into battle kind of thing, but it's still doing it in a relatively generic way. For example, the song reminds me a ton, just in terms of like concept and build a little bit of the track "Blessed Night" off of Saint Vitus's Lily F65, making sure I get the letters and numbers right. This all on here, very similar, in terms of having that really big riff, Wino talking about, yeah, my steel is sharp, my steed is strong. This song from Gates of Slumber feels like, it's, kind of a companion piece to that one in a good way. You know, it's good, but like this song doesn't immediately make me think like, oh yeah, 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 you got this song inspired directly from this particular short story or this particular movie or anything. And maybe it is, to be clear. Again, we don't have liner notes to the album with the promo that was released. So yeah, maybe the song is coming from something and I just not am picking it up in the lyrics that I can hear. But yeah, excellent song regardless.
So the in the closing two tracks for this, it's probably where my enthusiasm at this point has starts to wane a little bit.
Would you say you start to get lost in the fog just a little bit?
I kind of set you up for it, but it's not that the fog arrives, like it starts to build, and you
Mhm.
feel like this is going to be the epic track
Mhm.
on the record. And it just never felt like I landed somewhere that felt climactic.
Yep.
Um, and the transition into the closer, the plague, once again, we're back here on the uh,
Mhm.
world coming to an end. Yeah. Disease aspect of it that feels like it's a little bit of COVID inspired or, inspired by the Black Plague, and we're going to talk about that kind of deal. But
Mhm.
um, I have to say, like, I wanted something more to this album to close with a greater sense of force and delivery. Like, I didn't get that on those
Yeah,
last.
both of these last songs are, over the 7 minute mark. So they've got time to work with. And like you said, the fog one, it, feels like it's trying to build somewhere. And then when it doesn't, it just all of a sudden feels like, well, you just spent a lot of time on a long, protracted intro that never fully developed. The song isn't horrible, but for 7 minutes, it doesn't do a whole lot. I think the plague does more. It at least, does change in tempo some towards the end of the song, there is kind of one nice surprise I'm not expecting because it starts winding down at about like the 5.5 minute mark or so. And you're like, okay, yeah, probably about done here. But then all of a sudden they kind of like roar back to life. And for, the last 90 seconds or so, they just kind of rip. It's like, okay, time for all the guitar heroics and let's pick up the pace and just, really pound one out here. So it goes out on kind of a faster note that way. And so like, oh, I did not think you were going to do that. Okay. So yeah, I like the that very ending of the last song. But I agree with you in general that the last two songs are not the strongest overall from the album.
In summation here, um, after waiting 13 years for an iconic American doom band, um, I guess I came away from this record, one, excited that they're back together. Um,
Definitely.
and I think I don't know in terms of, touring or how much new material they have going, but it is a band that I think fits in the category of they never kind of got there to kind of where we were talking earlier in this. They never got their time in the sun, right? The amount of
Hmm.
exposure they deserved, um, relative to those key records. So hopefully within this sort of new, as you see, this year we've had great epic doom. We've had and doom as a genre is doing really well.
Yep. Epic Metal's doing really well.
If they can catch some of that momentum and gain some more sort of time in the sun, whatever, that's awesome. I'm
Absolutely.
really excited for them. I just don't think this record, it's concise. It's just six tracks, so they aren't,
Yep.
it's not like they bottled up 13 years of songs and put out a
Hmm.
75-minute record.
Yep. And I think that works well for them. That was one problem with their last full-length album, The Wretch. That one is almost a full hour. I don't remember how many tracks are on it, but that album did start to feel like it was maybe a little too padded out. This one, like you said, yeah, at under 6 tracks under 40 minutes, you're almost getting down to the point where it feels like a mini, album or a very long EP or something,
Yeah.
which is good. They get in, they prove they still have the goods, and they don't overstay their welcome on it.
Within this year, right, as we're sort of winding down,
Hmm.
is it worthy? Like, if you're going to point someone towards like some of the best Doom records of 2024, would it be something that you'd recommend for them?
That's a really good question. And it's harder than usual because, like you said, it's been a pretty loaded year for Doom releases. I think it's definitely a noteworthy one for the year, given the band's legacy, uh, given how good they are at this style. And again, it may sound like we're nitpicking on it a lot. Carl and company are very good at playing and writing doom metal for sure. And something we haven't touched on, besides just the performances being good, the production, I think, on the album is really, really good. It's heavy enough to make it feel very doomy. I think the drums sound great. They're maybe slightly loud in the mix, but I think that's a good thing because it kind of, even in those slower moments, it really kind of keeps your attention. There's never a point where I start to lose interest because, all the symbols and everything, are very bright, very clear in the mix. So yeah, I think it's the kind of album, if I was like reeling off, here's a bunch of good doom metal albums from the year, I would certainly mention it. If somebody wanted like, what is like the one or two best from the year, it probably doesn't make, that very short list though. Um, I think it's a really good comeback. It puts the band back on the map and shows that, yeah, they are still really good at crafting this style of music. But yeah, maybe it needs, one or two more songs or a little tightening up. It needs a better cover. Svart Records, really, come on. You can do better than this. We know you can. You've put out lots of records over the years. You can come up with a better piece of artwork for a cover to help relaunch this band. That and that kind of thing hurts,
Yeah.
it does. It's not, people look at, things flipping through, whether it's online or in the store. This is not going to catch anybody's eye, which is a real shame. It is worthy of being checked out for sure. And so Swart, come on,
Right.
hire
I mean,
artists.
I see your uh Seereth or Kirith Ungol sitting behind you there. If they had returned without a Michael Whalen album artwork, it would have been unacceptable,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
if it had just been like, the logo is cool, but if it had just been like, the big omega of two skeletons on the cover and the rest, and just, white on black, I mean, like, this doesn't fit your aesthetic, guys.
Yeah.
And the same is true here for, Gates of Slumber. This does not fit the long tradition of really good album covers that you've had throughout the years. So yeah, boo, bad art.
Yeah.
But yeah, I would say, yeah, I think for me, in summary, it is a good album, but it is not a great album. Gates of
Right.
Slumber have done better, and if things will work out, if they can catch some breaks this time, I'm absolutely confident they can do and will do better in the near future. What's kind of your final take on it in that regard? Is it top 10 of the year kind of material for you, or?
Um, so no, to your point, like most years, this would have been, I would say, one of my favorite Doom records,
Mhm.
especially from a band that I like, Suffer No Guilt through Hymns of Blood and Thunder. Those three records, Conquer is the one sitting in the middle that might be the best of the three. I will
Might be.
always have a soft spot in my heart for Suffer No Guilt. It is the most epic, the long sort of extended play of that record.
Hmm. Yep. Hymns
Um,
of Blood and Thunder, very tight album. Takes everything they'd been doing and just they've sharpened it up and refined it, and it works fantastic. Yeah, those three albums, that's a great run of albums.
oh,
I even like the debut. We haven't mentioned it, but yeah, the debut album, it was maybe still a little rough around the edges, but it has its moments. There's some good stuff on here too.
I think it points to the things to come.
Yeah.
And
Hmm.
um
Shows promise. check back next album will be even better. And they were.
I wanted this return to give me a little bit of that sort of iconic Gates of Slumber record
Yeah.
era, and it didn't live up to that. When I think about comparing it to other bands, The Obsessed came out with a record this year,
Hmm.
and Scald came out with a record this year. Out of those three, I've spent more time with the Gates of Slumber. I
Hmm.
mean, those are iconic bands that have sort of circular, in some ways informed the genre.
Yep.
And out of the three, I've spent the most time with the Gates of Slumber record. I was probably most excited for it.
Agreed. Yep.
Um,
Probably the same here. Yep.
and I agreed. Like, I think that hopefully, this is our shaking off the rust on this record. And when they come back, we
Hmm.
get, I guess, a greater sort of concentration of songwriting and an understanding of what Gates of Slumber for the fans, sort of hopefully, why we honor them and why we're excited for them to get back together. So.
Yep. Agreed. And I think, yeah, shaking off the rust is a good way to put it. And I think they shook off a lot of the rust. Again, it sounds like maybe we're down on this album, but it's a solid album for sure. It's the kind of album for me that I've played it a bunch of times. I've enjoyed it. It has, like we've said, some songs are better than others. It is the kind of album I don't know how much longevity it's going to have. Is this an album I'm still going to be playing 3 months from now? Mm, don't know. When I want to hear the Gates of Slumber, next spring, is this the album I'm going to reach for? Uh, I don't know about that. Because the one thing that I will circle back to, even though it's a good album, it's not only competing with the rest of the Gates catalog, and like we just said, there's 3 albums there that, I think we agree are definitely better than this one. But this album, because of, the material the band is doing right now, and like you said, with a lot of the material having that more introspective, bleak, isolationist look, I feel like this album more so than their classics, it also has to compete with stuff by like this band. It's like if I want to hear this style, do I reach for the self-titled Gates of Slumber, or do I reach for something with Wino singing in front of St. Vitus? So now you've got to compete with that for attention as well, which that's some pretty steep competition.
But
Whereas,
they
like
should.
you like to your earlier point though too, if I want to hear something that sounds like Conqueror, not like your point, this is much more unique. They had their own niche. There's not a lot of things they have to compete with other than their other two really great albums from this era.
All right. Well, I do think for a recommendation, I do think if you liked The Wretch, you may want to circle back and check this one out or spend a little more time with it.
Mhm.
Out of their discography, I do think it sounds closest to it. So,
Sure, yeah. Or if somebody just has heard, has gotten a little tired of listening to the St. Vitus or the Obsessed classics, but wants more material in that vein, they'll enjoy this album. Yeah. And I have enjoyed this album. It's not that I think it's a bad album. I just don't think it's going to do enough to stand out in the long term, to be an album that we're still talking about 5 or 10 years later. But maybe we can say, hey, this is the album that, got them back on the map. And then, holy crap, look what they did, 2 years later on the follow up.
okay. So do you have a call to arms, Alan?
I don't right now. I've not been checking out a lot of new releases recently, but I'm sensing you might. So,
Yes. All
what
right.
what would you
So,
like to call out here?
another a band that has actually been sort of absent for a while is Germany's Mountain Throne. Have you heard of them?
I don't know that one. Nope.
Okay. So I do have another. This Gates of Slumber seems a little bit less than ideal as a recommendation for you. Go check out Mountain Throne. Their record's entitled "The Silver Light." It
Silver
was
Light.
released earlier this year. Some a band that plays in a style of doom, but also has some heavy metal sort of epic aspects to them as well. That's sort of a record that's sort of a sleeper for this year and will be on my end of year list. So,
Oh,
um,
impressive. Yeah.
will recommend 100% Mountain Throne, The Silver Light.
Sounds interesting. Yeah, I'm looking at it over here on Metal Archives right now because I there's a band like was Mountain something I heard earlier this year, but it was not this band. No, I don't know that logo or anything, but yeah, I'll try to check it out later this evening. Absolutely. When Kellen recommends something that highly, people stop what you're doing and bump it to the top of your to playlist.
It's
I've learned that
100%
a long time ago.
going to speak to this fan base. I think the Gates of Slumber people will dig it. It's got some heavy metal side but it's also, you know, has a little more of a doom sort of foundation to it. So if that sounds like your thing, go check out Mountain Throne.
Foreboding the future with crippling fear. It needs to be conquered. The path is very clear.
That sounds like my kind of thing. All right. Well, it's been fun, Kellen. Any final words or thoughts before we stop this and send it on off to be rendered?
No, we're good. We're good. Thank you for doing this, Alan.
Oh yeah, thanks for inviting me to do it. It's been fun, and hope folks will enjoy the review. And I hope folks do check out the album. You know, while it may not be, you know, neither of us are, you know, giving it, you know, two thumbs up kind of thing. I'm okay giving it at least, you know, one thumb up kind of rating. It's definitely worth checking out, and let's get that spotlight on Gates of Slumber, so this time they can enjoy more success than they did. I feel like last time around they were close. They were getting there before, you know, tragedy hit. So yeah, let's help them get over the hump this time. All right, until next time, everybody, take care and keep checking out more content here on Heavy Metallurgy.